The 1950s was the decade when a new generation, teeny boppers, got their own identity through revolutionary rock and roll music, which became a force that would change music forever. With this new style of music, we see many female musicians struggle to find their place in the rock and roll world. We also see the invention of the double bass drum and synthetic drum skins. My name is Vicky O'Neon, I'm a drummer and educator. This and much more coming up next.
Vicky O'Neon presents
Drumming Through the Decades. In the early 50s, a lot of female musicians had lost their jobs, and the success for all-female orchestras in the 30s and 40s was heavily declining. The general opinion, according to music trade magazines, was that female bands were unable to compete with their male counterparts. Some of the remaining all-girl bands and their drummers survived thanks to musical films and Hollywood productions for television. These programs were limited to the West Coast in America, which was more open to female-centric entertainment. However, African American all-girl bands were not allowed. They were still victims of the cultural segregation of the 1950s, and advertisers weren't keen on supporting TV shows featuring black artists, although the music bands played mainly had African American influences. This makes me so mad. What's your opinion on this? Put a comment below. A few years into the 1950s, things started to change, and the television played a huge role in this. Musicians and bands could now be promoted through the TV screen around the world, and mainstream radio stations began to add rhythm and blues songs in their playlists. Yes! And finally, TV also started to air mixed-race R&B shows. Kay Carlson is the first woman to receive a drum endorsement from Ludwig. Ludwig was the company that invented the bass drum pedal and the drum kit. She eventually went against the trend of the time and actually formed her own 19-piece big band. She also performed at famous television shows like The Spade Cooley Show, which was popular at the time. Remo Percussion Company gave Kay Carlson the Excellence in the Profession of Percussion Instruction Award in 1989, and Los Angeles Times also recognized her for a remarkable tribalizing career that helped open doors for female musicians everywhere. Dottie Dodgian from California is another groundbreaking drummer from this era who was an innovator and very versatile in her playing. As a teenager, she played with Charles Mingus and later on with Benny Goodman, the Brecker Brothers, and helped to establish many other bands. In her early years, she was famous for her elegant brushwork and had an active career throughout her whole life. She released her own vocal album in 1996 at age 77. Wow. I also want to highlight Sheila Pearson on this side of the pond, who was voted the best girl drummer in the UK in the 1954 Melody Maker poll. She played with Ivy Benson, Lena Kidd Quartet, and the Dina Dee All Girls in the 50s and continued her career until 2004 when she retired in Devon after playing with the Sidmouth Town Band as a percussionist. Wow, some powerhouse women right there. Rockabilly was a style that developed in the South. The style essentially took country music and added drums and more beefed up sounds to it. So drums really played a key role in the evolution of rockabilly. And for those of you who don't know much about country music, it was an acoustic style of music with origins from Europe. Initially, they resisted having drums as a part of their sound, but in the 50s, other styles with drums got so popular, so country music realized that if they wanted to stay current, they better incorporate some drums, and drum roll, so rockabilly was born. A record label in Memphis, Tennessee called Sun Records played a huge role in popularizing this style with artists like Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Let's head over to my studio and I'll show you a little bit of rockabilly drumming. So in early rockabilly music, it wasn't the drums that was driving the music, it was the slap from the double bass. This is what they had used to create rhythms in country music. So in early rockabilly music, the drummer would only be playing with brushes because they didn't want the drums to take up too much space. So with the combination with the slap from the double bass, the muffled dead string guitar, and the brushes mashed together with the chicken picking guitar on top, you get a sound that's not quite rhythm and blues, not quite country, it's its own thing, which came to be called rockabilly. And a beat that I want to show you, which became especially popular within country music, is the so-called train beat. And this beat is primarily played on the snare drum, and it has a non-stop shuffle feel that sounds a bit like a train, hence the name of the beat. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. And here you can hear it in context with Folsom Prison Blues.
I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling around a bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps a-rollin' on down the San Antone.
You take a rock and a bop where it's really neat, and you put them together with the rock.
Sparkle Moore was one of the few female rockabilly singers, and she was sometimes referred to as the female Elvis Presley. She had a strong voice and dressed in men's clothing, often including leather. Sparkle's songs like Skull and Crossbones and Killer were self-written and controversial, and some people claim she was a punk even before punk was created. At a time when female singers only wore dresses, Sparkle Moore definitely stood out. In an interview with magazine Kicks, Sparkle remembered how she used to freak people out with her masculine stage wear. People would see me when I went to play somewhere and they'd say, "Can't you wear something more sexy like a gown?" Moore said. And I never would. I always wore a playing suit and I'd say, "This is as sexy as I get." In 2010, she was inducted into the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the same year released Spark-A-Billy, a 22-song collection she wrote and self-recorded. It's super cool to see that Sparkle continues to make music and on her own terms.
I woke up this morning, Lucy was not in sight. I asked my friends about her, but all they did was type Lucy.
So, what about rock and roll? Rock and roll is the foundation of so many styles from the 1950s up until today, and it was influenced by rhythm and blues, gospel, jump blues, jazz, boogie woogie, country music, and rockabilly. While rock and roll's formative elements can be heard in blues recordings from the 1920s and in country records of the 1930s, the genre did not get its name until 1954.
Bill Haley and his Comets.
Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets in 1954 is considered the first official rock and roll recording. It's a patchwork of all those different styles, with Bill Haley being a former country singer playing acoustic guitar. There was also a honking tenor sax from rhythm and blues, slapping bass from rockabilly, pedal steel from country music, and jazz influences on the guitar if you listen to the solo of the song. The drummer was a swing player who laid down a swing-style groove and fills. When you put all of this together, you get something totally unique, new, and revolutionary, which was the power and the drive of what became rock and roll. This song was used as the theme for a teenage movie, Blackboard Jungle, which teenagers absolutely loved and brought rock and roll to the masses and cemented it as a style. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is a key figure in the development of rock and roll with her electric guitar playing. She is often referred to as the godmother of rock and roll. Tharpe was a pioneer in her guitar technique, and she was amongst the first popular recording artists to use heavy distortion on her electric guitar, ahead of the rise of electric blues. She already started releasing music in the late 1930s, and in 1945 she had a hit with Strange Things Happen Every Day, which was the first ever gospel recording recording to cross over, hitting number 2 on the Billboard Race Records chart, which would later become the R&B charts. The recording has been called a precursor of rock and roll and has also been considered the first rock and roll record before Bill Haley and his Comets. So once again, we see the example of an African-American musician leading the way, but the white musicians then getting the popularity for that style of music. At least in May 2018, Rosetta Tharpe was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as an early influence. I would definitely urge you to go and check out Rosetta Tharpe and some of her amazing guitar playing and recordings.
Sweet little 16.
In the 1950s, records also became a lot cheaper, which led to the widespread access to all kinds of music. There was also a whole generation of middle-class families where there was a priority post-Second World War for children to enjoy their childhood instead of going straight to work, and they even got pocket money they could spend on records. You had black artists like Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Little Richard around the same time who wrote music for this new demographic known as the teenager. Record companies, of course, saw an opportunity to exploit this demographic and marketed music to teenagers, creating teeny bopper bands with lyrics about teenage love, heartbreak, and enjoying the youth, along with simple, danceable melodies and rhythms. So rock and roll music was specifically aimed at teenagers, and it spread quickly amongst the youth and was reflected in their lifestyle. Most people still wanted what swing music gave, but they didn't want to go back in time. So we see an explosion of African-American inspired music once again. Let's put our dancing shoes on and head over to my studio. Another important development from rock and roll towards rock music is that this heavily shuffled feel gradually started to become more frenetic and straight. And there was a transition period when you could start to hear this bouncy shuffle become straighter and straighter. And I'll show you what the difference is between the two. So here's the bouncy shuffle. And if I gradually start to make this straighter, we end up with a rock groove. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 with the straighter grooves, we also start seeing the fills that we are more familiar with today, ending on beat 1 with a crash, which was really revolutionary at a time and a trendsetter for most music after that. So, a fill could sound something like this from now onwards. And in the late 50s, drummers now start to identify themselves as rock and roll drummers. And we now see the modern pop and rock style of drumming evolve.
He come, so you better look out. He gonna sing a hand, a dance a hand, a even shout. Hey, hey, Charlie, hey, hey, Charlie, you gonna do the rock-a-bop. A rock-a-bop, you gonna rattle your bones. You got the rock-a-moans, oh, rock-a-bop, rock-a-bop.
I also want to geek out a little bit more on what was happening with drums in the 1950s, because this is when we saw the invention of the double bass drum, which can be attributed to Louis Bellson. He would use 2 bass drums rather than the double bass drum pedal that we are used to seeing today. He played with Duke Ellington and was featured with his own composition Skin Deep on Ellington's album, showcasing his double bass drum skills. This was the first time a double bass drum was clearly featured on a recording, and it just exploded, which then evolved to the double bass drum style we have today. Another interesting invention in the 1950s was synthetic drum skins. A problem drummers had been struggling with for a long time was the tuning of the drum skins, which would be made from calf skins and react to moisture and heat. Often the temperature in a club would go up with loads of people sweating and moving, which meant that your drums would slowly become looser and looser until you had to stop playing to retune them. In 1956, the first waterproof synthetic drum skin was created, and shortly after that, Remo created an all-weather Mylar drumhead. This was a polyester film made by DuPont, and these were drumheads that were unusually durable, inexpensive, and weather resistant, hence the name they still use today, Weather King. I think Weather Queen would also have been pretty cool, no? Maybe that's something Remo can come up with next.
Darling, you send me.
In terms of women, very few references are made in early rock and roll, especially regarding female-identifying drummers. See, women in the first decade of rock and roll were still under pressure of post-war America, where their roles were to find a husband, have children, and settle into a life as housewives. Lucy O'Brien says in her book, She Bop, The Definite History of Women in Rock, Pop and Soul, that rock was too rigorously male-defined for a woman to find a comfortable place. This might have been especially true for female drummers who had to fight not only the gender bias of their instrument, but also not feeling ballsy or masculine enough to handle the music. Someone who was brave enough in the early stages of rock and roll was drummer Claire Lane, who formed the band The Ramrods together with her brother in Connecticut in 1956. They had the hit Ghost Riders in the Sky. Lane went on to pursue a solo career as a singer in the 1960s. Big up to you, Claire Lane. As we head into the 1960s, we start to see many more women approach this male-dominated style. More of that in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your comments and thoughts. Please comment below and also make sure to like and subscribe. And if you haven't watched the previous episodes, go and do so, and I will see you next week again. Bye bye.